Greetings and salutations, everybody. It's Spencer Kyte, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man, here on Severe MMA, with another edition of 10 Things I Like, this time focused on UFC Orlando, UFC Fight Night, Thompson versus Holland, if you will. Or maybe I think it's actually UFC on ESPN, Thompson versus Holland, which takes place this weekend in Orlando, Florida, at the Amway Center, home of the perennially struggling Orlando Magic. This is a fight card that, as I said yesterday on One Question, I absolutely adore. I'm really looking forward to. There are loads of fights, loads of competitors that I am curious to see get back in there. This is one of those cards where I think there's some very meaningful, very important fights taking place. There are also some just interesting fights, just interesting matchups, chances to see people either for a second time or a third time this year, that they're in fights that are just going to tell us more about them. And as I said throughout yesterday's program, that's what I'm here for. That's all I'm looking for at its core. That is what I'm after in this endeavor, in this venture, is getting answers to questions, finding out more about these athletes through actual competition, through seeing them fight, take that next test, take that next step, seeing them fight against athletes that I have some history with, that I have some understanding of who they are and what a win or loss to them will mean for that person going forward. As I say that, it's just time to get into it. It's just time to go. Item number one, Kevin Holland's next and maybe final test. And I say final in the sense of this may be the last time that Kevin Holland gets to try to clear this hurdle. Currently, Kevin Holland is in my estimation, the most talked about fighter that has never beaten a top 15 fighter in the UFC. This is a guy that everyone went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs about in 2020 when he rattled off 5 wins in 8 months. I thought at the time and said you could go back and find it on Keyboard Kimura on the Substack that I thought it was flawed. I thought the criticism of Dana White not signing him coming off of the Contender Series was full of holes. I thought that people that watched sort of the Derek Brunson fight, which was the first fight he lost in 2021, and were a little bit confused that this is what happened and that it went the way it did, clearly to me weren't paying attention before Kevin Holland's big year in 2020. And even though he's looked good in his first 2 fights at welterweight, and I know there was a third, we'll get to it, it just sort of felt like more of the same to me, right? Like, not to disparage or take away from victories over Alex Oliveira or Tim Means, which are good wins, which are wins that I know the value of them. They set a good baseline for what to expect from Kevin Holland in this division. They're not the kind of victories that make me think this guy's suddenly going to be a contender in one of the deeper divisions of the UFC. I think he got a lot of respect, understandably, deservedly, for raising his hand and jumping into that fight with Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 279 when things went sideways at the weigh-ins, and he ends up facing Chimaev and losing in the first round. And most people, understandably, deservedly, are just going to sort of write that one off because you're going in on 24 hours notice against an absolute killer who just ragdolls you and is, the best of the wrestlers he's faced and lost to. And that's his kryptonite, right? A guy that can just take you down and find a way to beat you on the ground. And Chimaev did that in relatively quick and easy fashion. But I think some of that stuff, some of that willingness to take that fight and the bravado and the trash talk and the celebrity he's earned over these last couple of years kind of papers over that when he's had these chances to move forward in the division, when he's had chances to really validate that he's somebody that could become a contender, he's stumbled and stumbled hard. The Derek Brunson fight was a fight that he absolutely should not have lost. Derek Brunson was exhausted in that fight. Rightfully so. He wrestled for 25 minutes against a much younger man who, should have given him more trouble than he did. the Marvin Vettori fight, much of the same. And even if you go back earlier into Kevin Holland's UFC career, right, there are wins that shouldn't have been wins. There are fights that were close that shouldn't have been close if this guy is meant to be a contender. And again, this isn't me revising history or coming up with a new angle as we get ready for a Kevin Holland main event. Go check the internet. It's there. I will actually probably put the links in the show notes. I've been saying this. The fight with Darren Stewart during his 5-fight winning streak should not have been a close fight. Darren Stewart is not a particularly strong fighter in terms of the UFC, right? Like, he's a better fighter than loads of middleweights, but not in the UFC. He was a 500 fighter in the UFC, was coming in on a losing streak, and Kevin Holland made it more competitive than it should have been. He should have lost his fight to Alessio Di Chirico back in the day, and probably his fight against Gerald Meerschaert as well. Like, there were just instances before this where where Kevin Holland told us who he was, right? Where he showed us who he was. And that is a not serious enough guy, in my estimation, to be a legitimate contender. And so if you want to say, well, fine, he lost to a pair of wrestlers at middleweight, and middleweight probably isn't where he should have been fighting, or he has better advantages at welterweight. So now he's down here at welterweight, and we're going to throw out the Khamzat Chimaev fight. Great. I'm with you. I understand it. It brings us to Saturday and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who is not a wrestler, who is not a guy that is going to go out there and shoot a double. And if he does, I will laugh and I will love it. And we'll come on here on the takeaways. And the first thing I will say is shout out to Wonderboy shooting a double. But Stephen Thompson is also nearing 40. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. He too has that wrestling hole, right? We saw that in his last couple fights. Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad took him down, grinded him out, got their victories, and went home. Thompson's not going to look to do that against Holland. And so this is the one Holland has to win. This is, if you are serious, if you are meant to be a top 15 fighter, this is one you have to win. The really interesting thing for me about Kevin Holland at this point, he was scheduled to face Daniel Rodriguez at UFC 279, and I thought that was going to be a real test, a real litmus test, a measuring stick of whether this dude's serious or not. He skates out of it and moves up into a bigger, more high-profile fight that we all give him a pass for losing, and then lands in this even greater fight on Saturday as a result. He hasn't done anything success-wise, performance-wise, to merit the move forward to face a guy that's in the top 10, but he gets there because of the actions and the personality and sort of the performativeness of it and the emotion and support it earns him from the public. I think Kevin Holland has done a great job of maximizing all of those things without winning the fights that you generally and usually need to win. And now he's got an opportunity. And I say this with the utmost respect for Wonderboy Thompson, to face a guy that, if there's anybody in the top 10 that is ripe for the picking, that is a guy you can go out and maybe beat because they're at the tail end of it or they're beyond their prime, it's Wonderboy, right? Like, the other matchups in the top 10 right now are all miserable for Kevin Holland. And that includes Jeff Neal, who he beat way back in the day when they were both on the regional scene. He doesn't want anybody in the top 5. He doesn't even want Neil Magny, right? Because Neil Magny's a handful. He's a pain in the ass. He's going to do everything right. Kevin Holland doesn't seem to be a guy that wants to do everything right. He has success while still being able to be Kevin Holland and do Kevin Holland things against lower level fighters. But then he gets into these fights and he can't turn off the Kevin Holland of it all, and struggles and loses. And I want to see on Saturday, and I'm curious to see if he can actually do it. Because I think the crux of this all and the twist of this all is that I think if you rewire Kevin Holland to make him give him the mindset, if you do some Wizard of Oz stuff and give him the mindset of a Bilal Muhammad, the mindset and the work ethic of a Michael Chiesa, this guy's a world champion. Size-wise, measurables, great for this division. Clearly has a nose for the finish, right? Clearly understands the dynamics of, I have this guy hurt. I have them in a position where I can have success. Let's go. But he's just not focused. And if he could find a way to just flip that focus switch, I think it could be an absolute nightmare. But he may not want to. And so I really like that he's in this fight that feels like the opportunity for him to get that win that he needs. And we're going to find out once and for all, one way or another, whether this dude is capable of that. Item number 2, Bam Bam's big moment. Bryan Barberena, a guest on a conversation with series, the latest episode of which with John Anik is up now on this channel. Please go check it out. Like, subscribe, rate, review, all of those things. Tweet it out. Let your friends know. It's a great episode. Let's go. So Bam Bam gets this fight. He's on a 2-fight winning streak this year. He's earned 2 victories this year, a 3-fight winning streak overall. And he gets this fight with Rafael dos Anjos, one that he has wanted since he was in the corner of Benson Smooth Henderson when Ben lost to RDA way back in the day in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it's a fight that has a chance, kind of similar to the main event, to validate some stuff for Bryan Barberena. Right now, I don't think, going into this fight, many people view him as a top 15 fighter in this division. And they see this run as, and again, as always, I say this with respect, right? They see it as a cute little run. It's a nice little run against some guys that are towards the end of their career. The wins this year are Matt Brown by split decision in Matt Brown's backyard of Columbus, Ohio, I may add, and Robbie Lawler, which was a second round stoppage win. Sorry, excuse me. And so I think a lot of people look at it and go, oh yeah, it's nice. It's a good run. It's lovely, but it doesn't quite mean what it would have meant 2, 3, 5 years ago. Fair, completely understandable. I get that. But I wonder if it's also selling Bryan Barberena short just because of who the opponents are. And this fight feels like one of those moments where we're going to find out the answer to that. We're going to figure out whether this is really Bam Bam putting it together and going on a run and working his way into the top 15, or maybe just outside because RDA is not ranked and things like that. Or whether this is just that, like, hey, had a good run and this is about where you settle in. I love this matchup because RDA is a guy that brings it, that is tough to put away, that is super experienced, that has all the weapons, all the tools, all the abilities, and is going to push Bam, who isn't somebody that ever quits, right? He isn't somebody that is easy to go away himself. He'll be in there and stick in there with RDA for as long as it takes, which is probably going to be 15 minutes. Let's be honest. This is probably going the distance, and it's going to be grimy and gritty and dirty, as every Bryan Barberena fight is, because he likes to play in the mud. And I'm excited to see my guy that I've been talking with for the last several years throughout this return from his surgery get this opportunity. He's earned this. He's put in the work and the time and the years and gotten the wins to get into this position. And I'm eager to see if he can keep it going forward. Item 3, Flyweight Awesomeness. Mateusz Nicolau and Matt Schnell is probably the best fight on this card. Overall, like all things considered, putting everything together, it is the best fight on this card. Not because of the rankings, not because of the numbers or things like that, but in part because of the rankings and things like that. But because these are two superiorly well-rounded, talented, technical, skilled, tough-ass flyweights. And the flyweights always bring it. And it's what, like I said it yesterday, it's wild that we're not talking about this fight more than we are presently. And I get it. There's bigger names. There's bigger attractions on this fight card. But this is the most meaningful fight. This is the biggest high stakes fight on this card because flyweight's going to be front and center next year. We kick off 2023 with Davison Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno fighting for the 4th time to unify the flyweight title. And I think from there, we're just going to stay sort of in a cycle of having these big fights. I believe Kai Kara France and Alex Perez was announced for Perth the following month. And so it's just going to be a constant wave of these big, important fights. This is one of them. It comes before those, but this is one of them. This is 6 versus 8 in the rankings. This is Nicolau coming in on a 3-fight winning streak since coming back to the UFC, 5 fights overall. Machnell coming off that absolute chaos fest against Sumudarji in July, which for me is still fight of the year, just because it's an absolute slobber knocker and ridiculous. And it's a chance to see. I think this is a fight where we're going to find out. We're going to see really how good Matthias Nicolau is, because his previous fights, he's had some opportunities where he's been able to be more patient, where he's been able to pick his spots. He ramped it up a little bit against David Dvorak last time out. But Machnell's an agent of chaos, and he will be in his face from Jump Street. And so this is where we're going to see how Nicolau does in the storm, because we know how Machnell does. And I don't mean in the sense of wins and losses, but we know he can survive and he can live and he can swim in those waters. We're going to find out if Nicolau does. And I think this is going to be fight of the night. I think this is going to be wildly entertaining, and it's going to be really impactful in this division. And I cannot wait to see it on Saturday. Excuse me. Item number 4, a hugely important heavyweight clash. I know that I just said that the flyweight fight is the most important, the most meaningful, the best fight on this card. I stand by that. The fight between Tai Tuivasa and Sergey Pavlovich is a pretty close runner-up, though. As I said on one question, I don't understand how Tai Tuivasa is an underdog in this fight. I don't see how losing to Cyril Gane in Paris is a demerit. And I'm really interested to see what Sergey Pavlovich does against a fighter like Tai, that we know all the things about Tai, right? We know where he fits. We know what he brings to the table. We know essentially the floor and the ceiling and what you're going to have to go through to beat him. And I don't know if Pavlovich has it, but I'm sure as shit interested in finding out on Saturday, because that's what this feels like. This feels like the UFC saying, and look, I applaud this matchmaking. I think this was the fight. I believe this was the fight I called for after Tai Tuivasa's loss to Cyril Gane. This feels like the UFC said, fine, we know what we have in Tai. He doesn't lose any ground from that loss. Let's see what we have with this Russian kid. Let's just see. Because if he beats Tuivasa, Pavlovich becomes a fresh name, another name in that upper tier conversation in the heavyweight division. If he doesn't, Tai gets a good win over a very skilled prospect who is, I believe, 14-1 overall, maybe 15-1 overall, 4 straight wins in the UFC, coming off a sub 1 minute knockout of Derek Lewis. So that gives you some clout. If Tai beats him, it puts him right back in that mix, sort of restarts him right away. And if Pavlovich wins, fresh name, perfect matchmaking, terrific fight. Cannot wait to see how this plays out. As I said, with Barberena and Dos Anjos most likely going the distance, I think this one is probably a pretty safe bet for under the 1.5. We'll see what that's paying, and maybe have to include that tomorrow on Picks and Plays. Item 5, Dolidze wisely rolling the dice. I said it yesterday. I'm not a huge short notice fight fan. I wish the UFC did more 10-day contracts where guys got short notice opportunities, then got a thank you if there was no reason to have them back, rather than having them back 2 or 3 further times. And I don't necessarily like it for athletes that are already on the roster, because I think very little good often comes of it. This, however, for Roman Dolidze, is one of those instances where it makes complete sense to me. He is fighting up in the division. He is fighting up in the rankings against Jack Hermanson. He's coming off 2 very good performances that elevated his status and sort of brought the floor up with him, right? Those wins over Kyle Dawkins and Phil Hawes changed the way we look at Dolidze, who didn't look good in his first couple middleweight fights. They were slogs. The Trevin Giles fight, which he lost, and the Laureano Staropoli fight that he won, were both grinds. And if you ever want to torture yourself, go back and watch them. Watch them back to back. It's a miserable 30 minutes and change because, minute in between rounds. But the last two fights were really good. Great performances. First round finishes in both of them. Elevated stock, elevated standing, and now he's in shape. He's in the gym. He's in Vegas. And this opportunity to fill in for Derek Brunson comes up, and he just raises his hand and says, yep, I'm here. I'm in. And it makes perfect sense. Because similar to what I said with Tuivasa and Pavlich, right? If he wins, we go forward and we've got a fresh contender. We've got a new name in the top 10, and he's elevated and the run just gets even bigger and better, and we go forward. And if he loses, you can just look at it and go, all right, well, he lost on short notice to a top 10 guy that we know the caliber of. We know how good Jack Hermanson is. I said yesterday, he's sort of the Neil Magny of this division, where he's going to beat up to and including a certain caliber of fighter, but not those truly elite guys. Well, we're going to find out. If Dolidze goes out and beats him, history tells us that means he's a contender. And to go from, oh God, not this guy, to, hey, he's a contender in the span of 6 months, 7 months, that's a really good glow up for if you're Roman Dolidze. That's a really good way to close out this year if you're Roman Dolidze. So I'm all for it. I want to see how it goes. Can't wait. Thank you for bearing with me. It is officially winter here. Snow fell last night in large quantities. And it has, of course, meant that I now have a cold of sorts. And so the sneezing, the nose running. Thank you for bearing with me. Item number 6, Emily Ducote's sophomore appearance. Look, I was pumped when she debuted against Jessica Penne earlier this year. I think highly of Emily Ducote. I liked her run in Invicta. I like what she brings to the table. I liked her performance against Jessica Penne. Really looking forward to seeing her fight Angela Hill. Again, theme of this show, theme of this card. We know the caliber of Angela Hill. We know who she is. We know what it takes to beat her. We know what it means to beat her. Only solid fighters, only top 15, maybe even top 10 fighters beat Angela Hill. And so that's what this is. This is Emily Ducote getting a chance, getting an audition to come out and show in her second UFC fight that she's a top 10 strawweight. I think she is, but I love the fact that we're getting to find out. I like that we're not slow playing this with her, right? Like the UFC at times gets fighters like this and makes poor decisions. Either it's too much too soon or it's too slow for too long. They've nailed this. This is Goldilocks booking, right? They've nailed this. We're going at just the right pace against just the right opponent at just the right time, which is the Sean Sheehan sort of edict. It's not quite the best fighting the best when they are the best, because I think Angela Hill's best days are a little bit behind her, just a little bit. I don't think she's set to fall off or primed to fall off. We saw her look good against Lupi Godinez earlier this year, but I don't think she's someone that is suddenly going to rattle off 4, 5, 6 wins and move further up in the rankings than she ever has before. That being said, she's still really good. She's still a great litmus test here. She is that person, as I've said a couple times now on this show. She's that person that you got to beat to take that next big step, right? You beat, if you're Emily Ducote and you go out and go back to back against Jessica Penne and Angela Hill for your first 2 wins in the UFC to push your winning streak further at 28 years old, it sets you up for some big fights next year. And I know people will be like, really, you think Tecia Torres or Michelle Waterson is a big fight? Yeah, they're big fights. They're important fights. Maybe not Tecia. I believe Ticia's pregnant. Happy congratulations, Tecia and Rocky Pennington. But like, those are good fights. Those are big fights. Those are meaningful fights, right? The reason we were excited and interested in Marina Rodriguez and Amanda Lemos is because we know it's a big fight. It's a good fight. It's an important fight. You get through this one, and Emily Ducote is staring down big, important fights, big, meaningful fights. Mackenzie Dern, someone like that. telling me you're not watching that, telling me you're not intrigued? If you are, I think you're lying. Item number 7. Clay Guida's fighting. Like, not only is this long hair brotherhood, 40-year-old long hair brotherhood, but like, is there ever a time when Clay Guida bops out to the cage that you're not like instantly excited and instantly happy? Because here's the rundown, right? It's always a good walkout song. He's always singing along. He's usually playing drums. And then his brother smashes him around a couple of times. All of that is great. And that's even before the dude gets in the cage and starts doing laps and just running around. All of that before we even get to the fight itself. So the process of it, and look, TSN probably isn't going to show it to me on Saturday. And I'm very sad about that. But I know it's going to be happening. So even just internally, in my heart, in my mind, I will create it because it's so much fun and I love it so much. And then we get 15 minutes or less of Clay Guida fighting Scott Holtzman, which is a good fight, a competitive fight. We probably are going to get to see Clay Guida burp in the corner at least once, maybe twice. We're going to see Clay Guida do Clay Guida things, probably get rocked a little bit, probably wrestle back a little bit. I'm always in for it. If you followed me before I came here, before I turned 10 things into a video column, it was a written column, and insert person name is fighting was a regular feature because there are just those athletes, those competitors, those men and women that no matter when they're on the card, I like it. I'm in. Clay Guida is one of those guys. How could he not be? He's almost 41. I'm 44. I've watched his entire UFC career. This dude's great. It's not a meaningful fight. It's not necessarily got any divisional ramifications at lightweight, but like, you're going to have a good time watching Clay Guida fight. And if we get the full walkout experience, you're going to have a great time. And I'm here for every great time I can have. Item 8, Jonathan Pearce gets another challenge. Gets that challenge in the form of Darren Elkins, The Damage, still the worst tattoo in MMA history. And that's saying something because there are some bad tattoos. I'm sure somebody will hear me say that and be like, hey man, Alan Belcher's Johnny Cash or whatever. Feel free to start a list in the comments, but I am taking The Damage on your chest in like weird squiggly font to make it look like it's bleeding and ripped as the worst. But this isn't about Darren Elkins' terrible tattoo. This is about Jonathan Pearce, who's 4-0 since moving to featherweight, 3 finishes. The one fight he didn't finish was against Christian Rodriguez on short notice. And Christian Rodriguez is naturally a bantamweight, which makes it just weird, but also like, all right, that's, props to Christian Rodriguez, who looked good in his bantamweight debut in the UFC a couple weeks back, getting a victory over Joshua Weems. Pearce has looked good. He's looked like somebody, and he's somebody that coming off of the Contender Series, I wasn't sure about. I didn't know whether this was a guy that's, gonna just hop out in the middle of this division or lightweight, where I thought maybe he was going to compete. But man, he has really stepped it up. He's really become a very good fighter that plays to his strengths, that does a good job of keeping himself safe when he's in trouble, which we saw in that Christian Rodriguez fight when he got clipped a little bit, when he got tired. He did the right things in the 3rd round to avoid it getting real bad and slipping away from him. I said it earlier about Kevin Holland with the instincts for finishing. Pearce has those in spades. He continues to get better each time out. I think some of that is just maturing as an athlete and as a man. I think some of that is coaching and working with that crew at Fight Ready that I think is emerging and continuing to emerge as one of the best gyms in this sport. One of the best outfits in terms of improving fighters to a point where they reach their best, whether that's Pearce being just outside the top 15 or some of these champions that, have come through there. Henry Cejudo, I know Yuri Prohashka spent some time there. Zhang Weili has been there in the past, like great gym. And so Darren Elkins is bad tattoo and all. He's still a test. He's still a challenge. Same as I've said throughout. We know what it means to beat Darren Elkins. Even at this stage of his career, this late stage of his career, right? He's been in there 26 times. This will be number 27. We still know what it means. It still carries weight. Not as much as back in the day, but still a bunch. And if you're Jonathan Pearce and you go out and you earn a 5th straight victory at featherweight, in the UFC, that means something. That sets you up for a big fight next year, a bigger fight next year. Somebody just outside the top 15, maybe somebody in that lower third. Those are big, tough fights. Go look at the featherweight top 15. There's no easy outs. This isn't heavyweight where you win 2 and suddenly sneak in. You get into position to face somebody that's ranked at featherweight, you've done something right. You've done something good. Jonathan Pearce has done something right and good 4 consecutive times that he's gone into the octagon. And if he makes it 5, he's going to be fighting somebody and he might beat that person. Kid is good. Pay attention on Saturday. Check it out. Item 9, a fight that is a perfect matchup for both parties. And that's Tracy Cortez versus Amanda Ribas. Each of these women need the kind of statement that a win in this fight on Saturday would be. Cortez is undefeated in the UFC. She's rattled off 10 straight wins since losing her debut. I would still debate and suggest that she lost to Erin Blanchfield in Invicta, but officially the record says she won. So she has won 10 straight. She has controlled everybody that she's fought in the UFC, including a good performance last time out against Melissa Gatto. And so she's worked her way into the lower third of the rankings at flyweight, where she's kind of a step behind, or maybe just a step behind because of age, versus those 4 that I mentioned all the time in Casey O'Neill, Erin Blanchfield, Macy Barber, and Miranda Maverick, because she's 28 versus them all being 25 or younger. But she's right there. She's close. Again, I've been saying it keeps coming up, right? You get to a point where you're in that spot. Another win here gets you in there with a top 10 fighter. Maybe it's the Blanchfield rematch. Maybe it's Macy Barber. Maybe it's all the way up to facing a Caitlin Chukagian, who you want to see if she's kind of slipping. Maybe you're the one that welcomes Casey O'Neill back. Like, there's options, and they're all intriguing. And then on the flip side of that, you have Amanda Ribas, who right now, you have to say, she's lost to the 2 best fighters she's faced in the UFC, in Chukagian and Marina Rodriguez down at strawweight, where she fought most of her early UFC fights, save for one against Paige Van Zandt. She's had some good wins. She beat Mackenzie Dern in her second appearance in the UFC. She had that win over Paige Van Zandt. She had a very, very good win over Verna Jandiroba. And she looked okay on weird notice, weird timing against Chukagian, who is a tough out, right? Is just that person that's hard to beat at the top of that division. But Ribas, like Cortez, needs sort of that signature statement win over somebody that's ascending and has a little bit of buzz, has a little bit of momentum. I know how good a win over Verna Jandiroba is. The general public doesn't necessarily care, because Jandiroba is not somebody that is getting an opportunity to fight forward all that much. She's not someone that's being propelled into potential top 10 position, even though she's a former Invicta champ and has done well overall in her career. Maybe she gets there, maybe she doesn't. They're now in separate divisions. We can discuss that next time Verna Jandiroba pops up on a fight card. But this is the kind of win in this spot against a fighter that has some buzz, that has some attention. And whether that attention is because she's in the new Venom commercial and she's engaged to Brian Ortega and they pop up in each other's IG, or because you've been supremely impressed with her performances in the octagon, she has that attention, right? She carries some of that buzz and some of that intrigue. So each of these women, and Ribas does as well. Don't get me wrong. This isn't a one-sided thing. Hebos has some attention for that as well. We talk all the time about her personality and how bubbly and infectious she is. And so this is one of those ones that no matter who wins, they're moving forward in a very talented, very deep competitive division, and they're getting arguably the best win of their career, or in terms of status, the best win of their careers. Love fights like this, love matchups like this. So fascinated to see how it plays out and where it plays out. Can't wait for Saturday. Last one. Another look at Yazmin Haragwi. Look, unbeaten 25-year-olds are always fascinating to me. If you followed my writing throughout my career, I have maintained that position for a very, very long time. Undefeated young fighters are always interesting to me because it's not until they catch that loss that we know whether it's, hey, you're beating, weekend warriors and professional opponents, or holy shit, this person is the real deal. I'm nowhere near ready to make an assessment on Haragwi after one UFC appearance and 6 wins overall. But I'm interested in seeing fight number 7 this weekend against Estela Nunes, who is one of those fighters that back earlier in her career had some success, had some good fights over in one championship, hasn't been able to translate that since coming to the UFC and initially spending some time on the sidelines for USADA violation and subsequently through these first 2 fights. But just give me all the opportunities to watch fighters like this. Let me see another opportunity, another fight where I can determine, where I can make some assessment as to whether this is smoke and mirrors, whether this is a future contender, or whether I just need to sit here and be like, okay, I need fight 3, which is probably going to be the case. Just to be clear, the answer is probably going to be, I still need to see more, but give her a step up in competition. But that's what this is to me. I know I often sound like the beacon of positivity and the guy that's trying to convince everybody to watch every fight card for various reasons, 10 every Thursday. But these athletes that become contenders that we often say, oh, they came out of nowhere. No one comes out of nowhere. And so, yes, it's the first fight of a 15-fight card on Saturday. But Yazmin Haragwi is interesting. She's intriguing as a prospect. And these are the times, this is where we start developing those impressions and those ideas about fighters like her and various others that fight on the prelims, that fight on these cards, that everybody wants to dismiss as being not worth it, and the UFC doing us a disservice by giving them to us this way. Now, this card isn't getting that billing, but the last one did. The last one was positioned, and even I felt like it wasn't that great of a card, but I was still here on the Thursday telling you all the things that I was interested in, telling you the 10 things that I like. And so this to me is another opportunity, as I've said, just to get a look, just to find out, to help me understand better so that when I write my fighters to watch in 2023 piece during this sort of 4-week window between the last UFC event of 2022 and the first of next year, I have a good sense, or I have a better sense of where Haragwi fits in that. She'll be on the list. Again, she's 25 and undefeated. She'll be on the goddamn list. But she wouldn't be if I didn't pay attention. She wouldn't be if I didn't watch all of these fights. And so every time you're ready to say, I don't know who this is, and dismiss a card or dismiss an athlete because of it, give them the chance. Watch the fight. Go back and see, whether you want to tape it and watch it later or whatever, just check them out. Because if she wins this and then is facing somebody that next time out, you've missed the opportunity to have an understanding of her. That's just my approach to it, though. And that's just this show. That's just 10 things that I like for UFC Orlando, UFC on ESPN, Thompson versus Holland. It is a fantastic fight card. I cannot wait for Saturday to get here. Before it does, I will be back here with the picks and plays. We've turned a profit each of the last 2 weeks. We might be turning a corner. Fingers crossed. We might be turning a corner. I might be starting to figure out this MMA betting thing and this, make smart decisions instead of stupid decisions thing. We're getting there. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoy all the content we've been putting out. As I said off the top, please go check out the latest episode of A Conversation with the inimitable John Anik, who will be on the call this weekend and the following weekend at UFC 282. Until then, I am Spencer Kyte. This is Severe MMA. We love you. We appreciate you. We'll see you next week.